Hi folks, good evening and welcome to this webinar on winning contracts in the public sector. My name is Kevin Thistlethwaite and I'm going to be speaking for about 35 to 40 minutes and after that we're going to hopefully get some questions from you, and then we'll spend the rest of the hour answering those questions. We're here to help. We've got a lot of experts and there's some cash available help as well. So if the answer is yes to any of these questions, then absolutely we want to hear from you. And the person to contact is Eva Foran, and her details are there. Eva at cumbriachamber.co.uk. Couldn't be simpler. So a little bit about me, and why do I think I can sit here this evening and talk to you about winning contracts in the public sector. I'm really old and I've done many things in my career, and I've had a great career doing it. In fact, I've had several. I was head of the Ministry of Defence fuel supply chain, which involved buying lots of fuels from lots of companies and managing the supply chain. I set up the business advisory practice at Mott MacDonald, and I was the lead there for nearly 10 years. In total, I've had over 12 years experience of winning advisory services contracts, not least some government-wide consultancy frameworks. I've also advised public sector chief execs on complex and novel procurements, particularly local government. I was head of government solutions at the British Medical Journal, and that took me all over the world talking to many governments, not least contracts that we had and new contracts that we were able to win in Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Brazil. I also worked with the World Health Organization and the United Nations whilst I was there. Public sector pretty much throughout, and actually despite what appears to be a wide range of potential potential customers, very similar in their approach, very similar processes and very similar values. Currently I'm a Growth Hub advisor here in Cumbria. I have my own business, A7 Advisory Services. I tend to spend most of my time working with the Chamber of Commerce, and as such I've advised over 32 small medium-sized enterprises in Cumbria in the last 2 years. Many of them have been successful, not all, but they've all had excellent advice. I've spent time leading proposal submissions for national companies, bidding to get on project management framework contracts, seeking to win some construction contracts, and I've spent quite a bit of time working in the health sector using my BMJ experience, but working with companies in pre-hospital care, private ambulance companies, health training companies. I run a few workshops for the Chamber, and one in particular on winning public sector contracts, which is why I think I was selected from a large cast of potential presenters this evening. And in my spare time, I'm the Student Enterprise Advisor at the University of Cumbria. So that's me. So let's move on and have a look at some of the interesting stuff that we're going to cover this evening. I thought I'd start by making the case for why we should be interested in public sector contracts. Yeah, there's 4.9 billion reasons to start with, which for me is a big incentive. That's a lot of cash, which can provide a lot of companies with a great income. The public sector, they're a reliable customer as well. Sometimes they take a little while to pay, but you know they're going to pay. they're a great brand to be associated with. Certainly companies I've worked with, they really take pride in telling people which public sector departments and councils and authorities that they work with. Yes, the public sector sets high standards, but those high standards can drive improved performance in your business. They're not just there as hurdles. The public sector can provide a great new market segment for your existing offerings that you sell either business to business or business to consumers. And it does stimulate innovation to develop new offerings. And we'll come on in a second to looking at some of the drivers in the public sector at present, and you'll see how they need innovation. And a lot of innovation comes from small, medium-sized enterprises. Now, one of the questions I get asked quite often, or comments that I get made to me is, well, I'm a subcontractor. I just work for tier one large contractors. They win the business. Why should I care? Well, I believe that it's firstly, SMEs have got a great value to add. No company, no matter how big, has got a monopoly, particularly on ideas and innovation. And firstly, many tier one contractors, when they're bidding for large contracts, if they can show that they're including SMEs within their proposals, that often scores additional marks in the competition. Developing a relationship with a tier one contractor before an ITT is issued is an excellent activity for SMEs. Work with them, help them to win the work. You're then locked in together. That's a true partnership. Don't wait for a large contractor to win a contract and then come out and have a look around to find the subcontractors. They have a big choice. It's a big field. You have to compete then. But if you can get in early, you can be there helping them win the work. You're the one who's going to work with them to deliver it. And why take an interest in this webinar this evening? Why take an interest in some of the training that we're going to describe that we provide here at the Chamber? It's because that knowledge of how to win public sector contracts can really make you attractive to tier one or even tier two contractors who are bidding for the work. If you can provide some value to their bid, help enhance their bid, then that's going to position you ever so well. And we're just going to ask you if you could respond to this short survey. You can do that by voting using the field on the right-hand side of your screen at the moment. And we're interested in what do you consider in your business, in your market space, to be the greatest advantage of winning a public sector contract? Is it the kudos and the brand association? Is it the confidence that you're going to be paid? Is it that you know you have a clear course of redress if something goes wrong? If you're contracting with the public sector, there's nearly always someone who you can take a grievance to. Or is it that it's going to give you some great track record to support winning more public sector contracts in the future? Or is it, finally, that it opens up a new market for your existing offerings? And we're just having a quick look at your responses as they come in. 43% of you at the moment consider that the kudos and brand association is one of the greatest advantages of winning a public sector contract. And that's winning. That is the top reason at the moment, and second is that it opens up a new market for your existing offerings. Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you very much. Right, let's move on. It's really important, in my view, and I found it incredibly advantageous to understand my customers. The public sector can be complex, it's incredibly large, but there are some common themes that are running through the public sector at the moment, and some of the challenges that public sector managers are having to deal with. And if we have knowledge of these when it comes to putting together our proposals, then our proposals are going to have a lot more meaning, a lot more impact, and that we're going to be showing how we can add value. One of them, reducing budgets. We see this every day. What we often don't recognise, though, is the increasing expectations that we, as users of public sector services, are placing on the public sector. We now expect to go into hospital and be cured. We expect to have a service level from the public sector that's almost instant, just like we have when we order something from Amazon. Of course, meeting those increasing expectations is fine for Amazon, who have the income coming in and the money available to invest. Of course, our other expectation of the public sector is that we don't pay as much tax. We want to pay less tax, and so they're not going to have the same budget. Another theme that I've noticed in particular is the move from providers to commissioners of services. An example is in the health service, where at one time it would have been one organisation delivering health services for the region. What we have now is one organisation commissioning services from many other organisations, some of whom are public sector and some of whom are private sector. We also see it, and I think quite a bit of movement away in areas like benefits payments, national benefits payments through the Department for Work and Pensions, where everyone delivering those services would have been civil servants and public sector employees. Now, quite a lot of those activities, quite a lot of the process is carried out by private sector organisations who've been commissioned to deliver it. Outsourcing, of course, is another form of commissioning services. We see quite a lot of outsourcing. Interestingly, although not on this slide, we also are seeing quite a bit of insourcing afterwards. So we see a cycle where functions within local authorities, within the health service, are being outsourced for a few years, and then they're being brought back in-house, quite often because maybe the private sector supplier isn't still able to deliver value to either the customer or indeed to their own shareholders. A number of procurement organisations, a number of contracts that I've been working on in the last 3 to 4 years have positively encouraged risk sharing and making profit contingent on outcomes being delivered and a measurable impact that the work is going to have. My experience has been mostly in advisory services. So where we would go in as business advisors to look at a lean exercise, to slim down processes, to identify savings, we were being asked to put an amount of our fees at risk, that we would actually identify deliverable savings, and then we would take a share of those savings. I personally had no problem with that at all. The main thing is, in any risk sharing, and if any of you ever are in the position of bidding for a piece of work where there's risk sharing, the main top tip is make sure that everybody understands the baseline and how it's calculated. We've also seen an increasing involvement of not-for-profit organisations delivering many public services. In some areas, incredibly successful. In others, and I've had personal experience of this, not quite so successful. I think one of the challenges of not-for-profit organisations, particularly those who are using volunteers as their workforce, is that exactly they are volunteers, and they can take away their support and their services quite quickly, and this can leave a gap in the service to the citizens, to members of the public. So some of the themes there, if we can keep those in mind when we're putting together proposals, when we're bidding for public sector work, I believe, and I've got experience of where linking our bid to these themes can demonstrate that we're both interested in the customer and we understand the work that we're being asked to deliver. So the myths that bidding for public sector work, that engaging with the public sector is complex and difficult and different, and you need to go on a special course of some description to be able to do it. I don't believe that's the case. I don't think there is a secret recipe. It's still about relationship building. It's still about your technical competency. It's about value for money rather than simply price. It's about making a strong argument for your offer. It's about reliability and delivering our promises. It's about building our reputation. And it's about timing. It's about engaging at the right time with the customer and delivering on time as well. All of those points we would consider when delivering to a private sector client. Is there any difference with the public sector? Well, perhaps a little bit more transparency. It's evidence-based transactions. It's evidence-based procurement. And maybe they're looking for a little bit more around adding value. So what do we mean by that? Well, let's have a look at the public sector procurement teams. There may be some online listening to this evening. We either see them as gatekeepers, as the dragons protecting the contracts. Sometimes we think that they're not being entirely fair, that they have their favourite people to let contracts to, and we may not be one of them. Well, I used to run a public sector procurement team, and I've worked and advised and helped public sector procurement teams put together quite complex procurement processes to meet quite complex needs. And I've not found them to be any of those things. We have to recognise that the public sector, and in particular procurement, but also those with financial authority as well, they have an accountability for public expenditure. It isn't their money that they're spending, it's everybody's money. And we, all of us, all citizens, are really strict auditors. they're held to a high level of propriety. We expect them to be fair. We expect them to use our public money for the purposes that it was voted. And we expect them to demonstrate that. They do look for value for money, and a lot of people, I think, are cynical about this, but it's not the case. I've benefited from putting together and describing with evidence a high quality proposal that was way above the budget that had been put together. But because it was obvious that the quality was there, then the procurement team and the operations team responsible actually went back, it was a local authority, to their elected members and increased the budget because they had the evidence in our proposal to demonstrate that it was best quality. Procurement teams are also responsible for applying the current procurement policy. They don't make it up. There's the national policy for the UK level. There's also, at the moment still, the EU policies. And at local authority level and NHS trust level, there's their local organisational policies, which will be there and will have been put in place. They have to apply that policy. They don't have the same flexibility that a small, medium-sized enterprise, a family business where decision-making is rested in one or two people. This is about policies being set and policies being applied. They need to promote collaboration where it's advantageous. So a public sector procurement team isn't just inward looking. There are good ones, and there are many of them around, are looking at other public sector organisations. If we're buying electricity, can we come together with other organisations, create a bigger scale, greater volume, get better discounts? And they're looking at making sure that in place, whether they're delivering it themselves or whether others are delivering it, that there's strong project management to deliver the business benefits that are driving the procurement in the first place. And then here I'm talking about large procurements essentially. The new hospital project. It's not built just because we need a new building. The benefits of the new hospital are there to improve patient care, to reduce or to improve outcomes, to reduce waiting lists perhaps. And these need to be measured, and there needs to be the project management in place to deliver those benefits, not simply the building. Essentially, what's the role of public sector procurement teams? Well, it's to reduce risk. And one way of doing this is to make sure that everything is evidence-based. I look at it in a way that maybe doesn't sound quite the right way, but the role of a procurement team is to make sure that when there's a competition, they have evidence to justify eliminating people from the competition, not just selecting the best people. Another comment I get quite often is, but they won't talk to us. It's like a castle. Well, there are plenty of ways that you can get your messages across. Public sector procurement works essentially around this 10-step cycle. At the beginning, when people are thinking about the business case, what are the benefits, how are we going to achieve them, there's a real opportunity for us to get our messages across using white papers and thought leadership. Bear in mind it will go to everybody, but nevertheless they're our original thoughts. We can have keep in touch account maintenance meetings, just like the Salesforce does with any set of customers. Once we move into a formal procurement process, usually around about the time the prior information notice is issued, there'll be supplier briefings. Go along to them. A number of folks I work with who said to me, "Oh, we never get anything new when we go at the supplier briefing," and usually that's because they've not asked any questions. Go along, ask questions, keep the dialogue going. There's formal question opportunities. Ask them. Now, there has to be a high level of transparency, so the questions at this stage will be shared, and so will the answers. But the team won't show who is asking the questions. And then when it comes to writing the response to the invitation to tender, it may be very prescriptive in the questions that they're looking for you to answer. Before you start answering those questions, though, say, what messages do we want to get across here? And then as you're answering the prescribed questions, possibly that are online on the portal, make sure that you get your messages into those answers. But of course, answer the question. Finally, if you're unsuccessful, there'll be a period, a cooling off period, called the Alcatel period, before the contract is actually awarded. If you think that the public sector procurement team hasn't understood your bid, your proposal, challenge. Again, another myth that we hear a lot is that, oh, if we do that, they won't give us another contract in the future. Absolute rubbish, not at all. It can often help where a public sector procurement team has missed something, and you can be pointing out to them a really important fact that's going to help them. And it might have embarrassment in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to prove really valuable. And then I've just covered up the debrief. You will always have the opportunity for a debrief. It's a great opportunity for a two-way conversation. In fact, I would say debriefs, I've had the best success and the most productive conversations with public sector clients. Also ask for a debrief when you win as well. Why did we win? What was it about our proposal that you found that got the marks for us? So on to our second little survey. If you could again vote as you can, which of the following do you consider to be the biggest barrier to entering the public sector supply chain? Insistence on competitive tendering, high number of competitors creating a low probability of winning, that you feel unable to compete with bigger companies, that you're not able to meet the quality standards that are being asked for in the tender, that you're not able to meet the safety standards that are being asked for in the tender? Or is it simply the complexity of the tender documents? Or perhaps it's the time and skills to develop a competitive tender. Okay, let's have a look at where you're voting. I think they're still coming in. At the moment, the complexity of tender documents is coming in at 50%. The high number of competitors creating a low probability of winning is coming in next, equal next in fact, with a belief that you're unable to compete with the bigger companies. Thanks guys, that's really useful because one of the purposes that we're looking for from this evening is to develop the support that the Growth Hub can offer to you folks, and that's giving us a lot of insight there as to the areas. And I agree with you, they are complex. They are complex. The tender documents are complex, but it doesn't take too long to develop the skill, if you like, to be able to jump to the important parts. Yeah, we can help you with that without doubt. Sorry, let's have a look at Brexit next. And again, we'd like to know from you, what do you consider to be the most likely impact of Brexit on public sector procurement? If you could vote again, that would be great, please. Do you think we're going to see a relaxation of procurement regulations? Is there going to be less competition from Europe-based companies bidding for UK contracts? It's going to be less competition. Is that going to drive up price and make UK contracts more attractive for us to bid for? Or do we see a reduction in public sector budgets, which will in turn reduce the level of spend with small, medium-sized enterprises? So what are we getting here? We're seeing 75% see a reduction in public sector budgets, reducing the level of spend with SMEs. And the only other one that's been picked out is 25% of you seeing that there'll be less competition from Europe-based companies bidding for UK contracts. Interesting stuff. For what it's worth, my view is that the level of spend is probably going to remain about the same. There is quite a bit of European money at the moment being spent, but actually it's money that we sent to Europe in the first place. And the areas that it's being spent on are areas that should be a priority for any government, whatever the flavour of that government. So for me, I don't think there's going to be a great reduction in public sector budgets and the level of spend with SMEs. We still have to deliver public services. And if you remember back at the beginning, we were talking about the expectations of people in the UK. They're still going to be there, and so it's got to be delivered still. There will certainly be less competition from Europe-based companies. Again, in my experience, and it is reasonably limited, I guess, other than when it was in the fuel supply chain, and the oil industry is global anyway, I've never actually competed against European companies for any UK contracts. So thank you very much for that. That again is giving us a great insight. Finally, well, not quite finally, penultimately, where can we find some of these opportunities? Here's a few places to start. All of them great. For me, Contracts Finder is the one that I would go for first of all. All public sector contracts above £10,000 go on Contracts Finder, and so it is the best place. It's a great little website, actually, one of the government's best, and you are able to filter. You can filter by region, filter by market type. If you're also looking at something innovative, perhaps, you can still, despite, again, the myth that the government takes your ideas and then competes them and lets everybody else bid for them. That's not the case all the time, and the lady up in the top right-hand corner of this slide is proof of that. They developed a new infrared resistant material for combat clothing, and because it was so innovative, they were able to have a single tender contract to develop that, and then they are now the sole suppliers to the Ministry of Defence. A big customer, hence their smiles. And that comes through the Small Business Research Initiative. So if you have got innovative ideas, there's a route to take them to the public sector. And the others you can read in your own time. So, in summary, winning public sector contracts is about attention to detail. If you remember, it's about evidence. It's about demonstrating value for money, and that means, unfortunately, you do have to write it down. You're not going to be able to win public sector contracts by going and having a conversation with the chief exec and walking away with a contract. It's developing the skills to write it down, but they're not too difficult. Prepare well in advance, as you do with all your customers. Look ahead, see the projects that are likely to come to market in the next few weeks, few months, or even in the next year or two. Start to prepare. Look for a tier 1 supplier perhaps who you think will be bidding, and go and get alongside them and see how you can cooperate together. I say it's evidence-based, documented, relevant. You can develop a dialogue. Just be aware of the constraints we impose on the public sector. They don't put them there to make it an easy life. We impose the constraints of propriety, of accountability. We expect to see where our money's spent. The public sector teams have to work within that, but you can develop a dialogue around the cycle as I described. Finally, and this is a personal view, the public sector procurement regime is considered by many to be best in class. As I said, I've worked in Saudi Arabia, I've worked in the Middle East, I've worked in Brazil, South America. They all see the UK public sector as an exemplar. And I don't think it's likely to change much after Brexit, because it is the best practice, and why would we change that? Finally, and then we have another short set of questions for you. We don't actually have a survey. We've just some questions we'd like you to respond to in a second with a quick response back through the webinar. But 5 top tips for winning public sector contracts. Think their agenda, not ours. Think, what is it that's keeping these folks awake at night? What was the problem that's driven them to come to market and issue the invitation to tender? Respond to that. Don't just tell them that you're brilliant at window cleaning. So is everybody. Don't be put off by perceived complexities and rumour. It's not that complex, and the rumours are just that, rumours. I've never found any evidence to back them up. Seek your competitive advantage by adding value. As an example, just been working on a patient transport services bid with a company that I'm working with. And we're looking to add value by saying that our drivers are not only going to drop patients off, but they're going to go into the house with them and make sure that they get a hot drink and check that the house is safe before they drive away and leave them. It'll take 5 more minutes, that's all. It'll take another 2 hours of training for the drivers, but what a great piece of added value that's going to deliver. Think solution, not product. How are you going to solve the problem? Don't just talk about the product, because the product is one of many that can solve the problem, but how your product is going to solve the problem and describe that, much more powerful. And finally, access the Growth Hub business support that's available, of which, would you please drop in the question function on the webinar, could you tell us which one or more of these offers for support you would like to see, or any other that you think we should be looking at, and how we should be providing the support to folks who are trying to bid into the public sector. I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that. We'll have a look at the questions that have come in, and then we'll be back to you in, we're going to take about a minute's break, and then we'll get back to you. Hi folks, we're back with you. If we don't get to answer all the questions this evening, we will email you. In fact, we'll email everyone. We'll take a public sector lead on that. We'll email everyone with the question and with the response. One of the questions that came in was suggesting that even though there was a move and a government initiative to make the qualification and tendering process less complex and simpler, that actually it was still a complex, time-consuming and costly activity. And someone else also said that, you know, we mentioned not having time and skill to do a successful tender. Absolutely, time, it is. And unfortunately, I fear it is still more complex than many people would like. As a taxpayer, I'm not too upset about that, actually, because I think all the complexity comes from case studies where things have gone wrong, and you can't blame the procurement teams in the public sector, local authorities, central government, for wanting to make sure that those errors, the problems that have arisen from them don't arise again. And unfortunately that does translate into quite complex tender documents. That said, I've seen a few from the NHS recently where most of the answers were yes or no answers. There was probably 3 or 4 questions that needed planning and consideration on what the answers should be. The others were simply, are you compliant or not? Myself and a CEO of an SME recently, we completed a tender for a, well, actually probably worth about £1.5 million contract, and we did it over a weekend together. Maybe still too much time for many people, but 2 days for 1.5 million, that's not a bad return on your investment. Also, another plug for the team here at the Growth Hub. If you have got a tender that looks complex, that you would like some help with, then we've got folks here, we've got the money to pay for them as well. We'll come along, speak to Eva, we'll come along, we'll sit with you, we'll help you write them. There was a bit of an approach in the supply chain initiative where we weren't helping too much, we were maybe advising and telling. That's changed. I'm sat here next to Eva and she's nodding furiously, and we'll come down, we'll help you write them. We will write as much as we need to with you as well. We'll work with you, partnership together to help you win those contracts. Just going to have a little look further down the list of questions to see if any more have come in. So just bear with us for another minute or so. You'll probably hear a mouse clicking. And a comment, I think, perhaps, although a question at the end, about if you as an SME don't have the full range of services that a public sector organisation is looking for, then partnering is a great solution. Find 2 companies that come together with complementary skills, expertise, and bid as one. Those partnership arrangements do need to be put in place, and they need to be quite robust. Because, going back to one of my slides, role of public sector procurement, reduce risk. Where you have two companies coming together and there's a weak contract essentially in place between the two companies, then that is a risk, and it's a risk that the services are not going to be delivered. Again, we're very happy to come and help you construct those partnering agreements. We may need to get legal help as well, but essentially a lot of it is how are you going to work together, who's going to take responsibility for what, and so long as that can be clearly stated and presented back to the customer, it will reduce the risk and will certainly enable you to compete with probably bigger companies. Okay, that is almost it for this evening. A final pitch here with the support that's available. It doesn't describe exactly that we will come and help you get ISO accreditation, we'll come and help you get health and safety accreditation, we'll come and help you write tenders, but we will. All you need to do is call Eva and she'll make the arrangements. So thank you very much for listening this evening. Thank you very much for taking part. The responses to the short surveys have been really informative and we're incredibly grateful. And we look forward to seeing you at some time in the future, either on our next webinar or one of our courses. And again, if you missed any of the points, don't worry. This session is going to be made available and we'll send a link to you within 24 hours so that you can download it and watch it at your convenience.